Hey everyone. So let's say you're in college, you're in your early 20s, and you're in that phase of your life where you're really into existential philosophy and you're really thinking about the meaning of your life and how to become an authentic human being who's able to get above the babble of everyday life and try to become someone who's more knowledgeable about life and how things really are compared with other people. And you're reading all the existential philosophers Sartre, Kierkegaard, and once in a while you stumble upon this name Heidegger and this book called Being in Time, which seems to have influenced all these existential thinkers that you've heard about. But when you actually try to learn about it and try to read it, you realize that it's a total brick wall. And I think that a lot of people have this experience with trying to approach Heidegger, and it's kind of this weird experience because really there's only one book by Heidegger that most people say you need to read, which is Being in Time. Not only the density of the book, but also the ambition of the book, which is basically to overturn metaphysics and to restart philosophy from a different basis of assumptions than it has been for basically the entire history of philosophy. So I wanted to make this video not really to explain the concepts of being in time, but just to give you some tips and advice, some general ways to approach reading this book for the first time, which I know can be very difficult. So the first thing I just wanted to say is about editions. So by far, the most commonly used edition is the McCary and Robinson edition. This is the older edition, but Dreyfus says this in his lectures that it's probably the best one for beginners. I would actually disagree and say the edition I have here by Stambaugh is probably the easiest to read and the best for beginners. It's in the SUNY series of continental philosophy. It also has a beautiful cover. Like the companion guide has the leaves put in a row with an orderly paragraph behind it instead of what we have here. So I don't know. I think just for the aesthetics of your bookshelf, this edition is the best. The next thing that I would say is that it's very important, and I think a lot of people end up doing this anyways when they approach Heidegger, is to read and learn a lot about Heidegger before you actually read him, read his actual writing, just because Heidegger has amassed so much hype and such a big fan base within the philosophy community that there are a lot of resources for you to access. And how I would approach it, I would start with David Cerbonne's book, Heidegger, A Guide for the Perplexed. It's a part of a series of academic books that basically are explainers for really tough concepts in philosophy. Some of them are hit or miss, but I think the Heidegger one is actually really good and very clear and also very thorough. So it's not as if you feel like you're getting like a Spark Notes version of Being in Time. You actually get like real explanations of the concepts, which I really enjoy. I would also, while you're trying to read Being in Time, supplement with videos. There are actually a lot of YouTube resources for this. One of them is Hubert Dreyfus's 28 video lecture series on Being in Time, and then he also has I think it's like a 26 some video series on later Heidegger. Both of those are pretty good. I think sometimes Dreyfus, his reading of Heidegger is definitely bent towards his own philosophical goals. He focuses a lot on mood, affects, and so he will definitely try to steer you towards one interpretation of Heidegger. So if you don't like that, then I wouldn't use him. Another great YouTube series is Dr. Greg Sadler. Anyone who's a fan of existentialism probably has encountered his videos somewhere, but he has a brilliant playlist of videos about Heidegger. It's not just Being in Time, but also his later writings too. So I highly recommend that. He's a great teacher. There's also a lot of short series. Then and Now has a great one. Epoch Philosophy is starting to make Heidegger videos. And Plastic Pills has a really good explainer video too. One resource that I've been really enjoying that's only come out recently is Simon Critchley's podcast, which is also on YouTube as well, called Heidegger. I'm not sure what's up with the name, but Simon Critchley is a great advocate for Heidegger's writing, as well as the writing of Emmanuel Levinas, who was highly influenced by Heidegger. And Critchley is really great about trying to popularize Heidegger's main concepts and try to introduce them into the public discourse, which I really enjoy. So I highly recommend his series. It's very thorough. He's very relaxed, and he's like very good about his teaching style. You kind of feel like you're in like a graduate student seminar where he's just kind of rambling on about the different concepts, but he does it in like a very genial way. Okay, so the third thing I want to talk about is just about scheduling yourself. So I think this is always important when you're dealing with a big fat book like this. a book that maybe you've always wanted to read, but you've never felt like you've had the time, or maybe you stopped midway through. And that would be to schedule a reading of the chapters. So there is a part one, no part two. And then part one is divided into division one and division two. And so what I would say is take the number of chapters. So in this edition, there are 83 chapters, and all of them are pretty short, actually. Some of them are even just like a couple pages long. So for example, like this chapter is literally just like 3 pages. So some of these chapters are really short. And what I would do is I would schedule yourself to read one chapter a day. And that way you know for sure that as long as you keep with your schedule, you're going to finish the book within 3 months. If you want to read the book faster than that, you could definitely increase that to 2 or 3 chapters a day. I wouldn't recommend that though, because a lot of the chapters that he writes are highly dense and they take a lot of, I guess, stewing to really absorb. And honestly, that's the best thing that you can do with Heidegger, is not really expect that you're going to understand everything he says, but that you're just kind of absorbing the world that he's building and the new kind of philosophy that he's trying to do. One other thing that I want to impress upon you is that the style of his writing is not really argumentative, and I guess this kind of characterizes continental philosophy in general, that it is more focused on conjectures. He kind of just states things like the ontological structure of Dasein as being in the world. He'll just say that and then he won't really prove it, and I think the reasoning there is that some of these things that you can't really prove because they're kind of the prerequisites or the primordial facts of being. So they're not really things that you prove, they're just things that are, and you just have to kind of accept that. If you're really into like a Spinoza, where he proves things by induction or whatever, then this book might not be the best for you. So you kind of just have to get into that mindset. Focus on kind of just getting a sense of the terms. I think that's probably the biggest thing. Like, what exactly does he mean by Dasein? Capital B, being, versus lowercase being, versus beings with an S. What does being in the world exactly mean? What is world? What does it mean to be with others? What is other? So, those very basic concepts, getting a sense of those things. One of the things about Heidegger is that a lot of these things kind of seem common sense, like when he talks about attunement and significations and meaning, how we are thrown into a world with preset networks of meaning. Like, those are things that we can already intuit from our just basic everyday experience. And I think Heidegger would have wanted that, because what he's describing is just kind of everyday life. What he describes as Dasein, for the most part, what he describes as average everyday Dasein. And one other thing that I wanted to mention is that there's a certain poetry to Heidegger's writing, which I think is underappreciated. And I think this really comes from Heidegger's desire to capture the rhythm of Dasein, the rhythm of being. And so you'll see that, at least in this edition, that Heidegger, his writing flows. And he, most of the time, except for I would say at the introduction, where he's talking about Descartes and Kant and whatever, for the most time, he doesn't try to like obfuscate his writing with like a million references. In this division one, where he's just kind of explaining the basic concepts, he rarely ever references other thinkers, which I think is very helpful for trying to understand what he's saying. Of course, Heidegger is influenced by a lot of people: Descartes, Kant, Husserl, Kierkegaard, but I honestly don't think you need to know in depth those thinkers to understand what Heidegger is trying to get at. Heidegger really is trying to start from ground zero of his thinking and building up from there. This book is really a world unto itself, and I think it's a great place to be absorbed in. Obviously, it's a landmark piece in the history of philosophy. Another thing that you can do is try to read the people who were influenced by Heidegger. So, the existentialists that Sartre, Beauvoir, Hannah Arendt, Merleau-Ponty, Levinas, phenomenologists. Everyone in the 20th century has been influenced by Heidegger in some way, and I think that you'll find that reading him and getting just a basic idea of what he's trying to say is very fulfilling and will help you a lot in your journey to become an expert philosopher. Anyway, so I hope you guys all enjoyed that. I'm going to try to make more videos now that I have more time with school. So let me know if there's anything that you want to see in particular, if you want me to keep talking about being in time or other philosophical texts. I'd be happy to do that.